Hey guys, it's Frank from Leap. Today we're going to be doing another care video, this time on this beautiful species right here. This is the Chahoua gecko, or mossy prehensile-tailed gecko, or affectionately just Chewy for short. Along with the crested geckos and gargoyle geckos and giant Leachianus geckos, these animals come from the islands of New Caledonia. There are two varieties, not subspecies, two varieties of mossy prehensile-tailed gecko available in the hobby. There is the pine island, which of course comes from the smaller pine island, which is what this particular animal is. And then there's also the mainland Chahoua, which comes from the mainland island of New Caledonia. There are some minor anatomical differences between those two varieties, but in terms of care, they're basically the same. So as far as our video is concerned, it doesn't really matter whether you have a pine island or a mainland. You know, if you get into the nitty-gritty of it, some advanced breeders may disagree with that, but for the most part, they're basically the same. Here's my female Pine Island Chahoua. She's a really beautiful animal. Zoom in. Beautiful oranges, and she can fire up even more than this. It's the middle of the day right now. This is her fairly subdued actually, but still a beautiful, beautiful animal. You can see why they're called mossy prehensile-tailed geckos, that beautiful mossy licheny type pattern, the orangey, rusty, brownish coloration, which blends in so well with the bark of trees, which is where they spend so much of their time. Because these animals come from New Caledonia, which is a semi-tropical climate, that does make them one of the easier animals to maintain in our homes, because most of our homes have fairly similar conditions. So stick around and find out how I keep this wonderful species. Let's take a look at the habitat that I have set up for my pair of mossy prehensile-tailed geckos, or chewies. This is a 22 by 17 by 30 inch, which is actually a prototype enclosure, so you guys don't have access to this. You guys have access to a 22 by 17 by 24, which is about this tall. And that I would consider to be the minimum for an adult individual or pair of chewies. But then the other ones that you have available are 36 inches tall, which are, you know, about this high, which would be even better. So if you can spring for the 36-inch tall one, fantastic. If you just get the 24-inch one, that's fine too. Let's take a look at the inside of this habitat and see how I have it set up. This is one of my favorite enclosures. You can see how beautiful it is. Makes it a great, great impression just from the outside. So I open up the door, and you can see that I have one large bushy plant. This is a croton species, tropical plant. Grows very, very well in Chahoua conditions. You see I have several branches. I have a really thick one, multiple smaller ones, and then also a nice cork tube here. They do like to spend some of their daytime hours in that cork tube, or resting on the sides, or hidden in the shade, but then they will also occasionally bask underneath UV light, as you see my male doing right now. The bottom is set up fully bioactive, as all of your Leap habitats can, and in my opinion should be. You open it up and you can see inside, we've got our bioactive tray, good holes for ventilation, bioactive substrate in there, living earth, lots of leaf litter, lots of springtails, and a bunch of other cool little critters too, which will help to break down waste. For the most part, this is maintenance free. You want to give your animal lots of choices. Lots of sunny spots, lots of shady spots, warmer spots, cooler spots, places to feel secure, places to bask out in the open. Let's talk nutrition and how we feed these wonderful little animals. They are omnivores, just like the other New Caledonian geckos. Although with this species, insect prey items are probably a bit more important than with your other species. I tend to feed them 2 feedings of live insects and 1 feeding of prepared gecko diet. It's important to gut load your feeder insects beforehand with very calcium-rich and vitamin-rich foods, kale, sweet potatoes, fruits, all sorts of veggies, things like that. Make sure you do that to your feeder insects beforehand. And then I do dust those feeder insects with calcium, pure calcium powder. And every once in a while I will give them a vitamin D and multivitamin supplement as well. And that goes on all their feeder insects. I generally feed them about 4 to 6 crickets or similarly sized insects like say dubia roaches or silkworms or things like that once or twice a week. And then also once or twice a week I will give them a prepared gecko diet. I really like the Pangea complete gecko diets. Rapashi products and similar other gecko products usually do work quite well also. Let's talk about the 5 parameters of animal husbandry, starting with parameter 1, daylight. I provide daylight in the form of a Leap high output LED fixture. This provides a nice bright light for the animals to regulate themselves by, to control their circadian rhythms, and also provides bright light in order to grow the beautiful plants that look so great in our enclosures and also provide oxygen and humidity to our enclosures. They do experience some seasonality in New Caledonia. I recommend that in the summertime, you have the lights on for about 13 hours a day. In the spring and in the fall, about 12 or 11 hours on. And then in the wintertime, about 10 hours on. Like with all reptiles, UV or ultraviolet light is important and is beneficial. Provide them with UV light via a T5 high output bulb, which I do run for less time than my LED bulbs, just for the sake of saving electricity, and also because high output UV light is not going to be naturally occurring throughout the entire portion of their day, more like around midday. So we don't know exactly how much UV light we need to provide our animals, but I like to provide it for around 4 to 8 hours a day. Just make sure that your animals are able to be fully exposed to the light and to be able to be fully hidden from the light if they so choose. They should have those choices. They don't need a ton of UV light, they don't need it super strong, so I do provide them with a LEAP 5.0 bulb. Parameter 3 is heat. I do provide them with a hot spot of around 80 to 83 degrees. I try not to get above 85 degrees. If a prolonged exposure to more than 85 degrees Fahrenheit could possibly cause stress or even be dangerous to the animals. So 80 to 83, and that's just in one spot of their enclosure. The ambient temp in your Chahoua enclosure should be in the high 70s, high to mid 70s. The cooler spots should be in the low 70s. Now it's okay for it to get down to about 60 to 65 degrees at night. Even in the summer, that's fine. I wouldn't go any lower than 55 degrees. That would bother me a little bit. In the winter time though, 60 degrees at night is no problem and will actually help them to slow down and cycle themselves out of breeding for a little bit, which would be beneficial for them long term. Parameter 4 is water. I provide them with water mostly via a LEAP misting system, which comes on in the mornings, in the evenings, and occasionally at night. I do vary that seasonally. They do experience more of a wet season, more of a dry season. So in the summer and spring, I tend to water more often than I would in the fall and in the winter. You want to try to thoroughly soak the surfaces of your terrarium, of your habitat, without completely soaking and saturating the soil through. You don't want a sloppy, soupy mess of a soil substrate. You don't want that at all. So you do have to be careful to make sure you don't overwater. What I like to do is to kind of do a more conservative misting schedule on my programmable LEAP mister, and then go through and manually mist, either using your LEAP mister or by hand, and occasionally adding water to the substrate as needed, because you don't want to just set it and forget it and then overwater your terrarium, because that could create some nasty conditions down below. So thoroughly coat the surfaces, allow it to dry out in between mistings, and also do provide them with a shallow water bowl of fresh water at all times, because they will utilize that as well. Parameter 5 is humidity. They are semi-tropical species and they do enjoy high humidities. During the daytime, I like around 60 to 80% humidity, and at nighttime that can go up from 80 to 100%. Now the humidity will naturally go out as you turn your lights off and it cools down. The humidity will spike. If you're finding that your values are less than that, you will want to add a fogging system like the LEAP fogger, which you can then program to try to achieve those humidity levels of around 60 to 80% during the day and 80 to 100% at night. Just make sure that you do allow the terrarium, the habitat, to dry out. It should not be constantly wet. It should not be constantly 80 to 100% humidity. That could lead to bacterial mold growth. No good. Let's talk about chewies as pets, as handleability. Now, as you can see from this video, I've been holding one of my chewies the entire video. They make one of the very best pet reptiles in order to handle. I have found that chewies are actually more calm and more tame on the average than crested geckos and gargoyle geckos and leachianus geckos. So in my opinion, they are actually the best pet New Caledonian gecko. Now, they are a bit more difficult to breed than, say, a crested or a gargoyle gecko. They take longer to mature. They are a little bit less common. They are also quite a bit more expensive, but you can still find them for reasonable prices. And if you're looking for just 1 or 2 pet geckos, this is the one that I would get, because they tend to be more bold, more active than the other species, and also just easier to handle. So I do think this is one of the very best pet reptiles that you can have to actually handle on a semi-regular basis. So how would I classify this species in terms of experience level needed? I would say as a beginner. Some people may disagree and say intermediate, because they do require live insects, they do require UV light, but in my opinion, all New Caledonian geckos should be provided with UV light and with live insects. So that really doesn't make any difference at all to me. They're just as easy to take care of as crested geckos, as gargoyles, as leachianus geckos. So I would classify this species as a beginner. they live a very long time. They can live 30 years plus. Very handleable as long as you work with them and treat them with respect. Eat prepared diets, eat easily found foods. So definitely beginner species in my opinion. Guys, I hope that you enjoyed learning about the Chahoua geckos. We will have many more species profiles coming up in the future. If you have any ideas, please do put them in the comments below. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to the Leap channel. We'll have lots more great content coming up in the future. See you then.